Hello there, lovely people. It's Alex from Nintendo Live here, and ever since I first got my hands on DK Bananza at a preview session, I've been wondering to myself, what happens when you destroy everything? In a game that's so focused on destruction, what happens if you take it to its logical conclusion? Are there any safeguards in place? Does the game break down in any interesting way? I thought, at the end of the day, they probably compensated for this. They can just remove all the destructible terrain and so they can see how things run. But that's Nintendo, not me. And I don't like dealing in hypotheticals. I like doing things. So one evening I thought, you know what, sod it. I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna clear an entire sub-layer. At first I thought, I'll do the hilltop layer. It seems small, it seems manageable, not too big, just sort of mostly flat. The more I thought about it, the more I thought, that's boring. More to the point, it's not exactly an iconic layer. I mean, I like it, don't get me wrong, but I think the one that everyone thinks of when they think of, early layers, it's Lagoon. It's the big old Lagoon. So I destroyed the entirety of layer 100. That's what it looks like. I knew I'd be leaning heavily into the Bananza forms, and as you'll see in this video, a lot of it was done using DK's Kong Bananza. But anyone who's got a reasonable way into the game will know that, well, there's a different Bananza that would be even better. It's a little bit spoilery. And honestly, I'm not someone who likes to spoil anything for anyone. At the end of the day, I think it's much better to experience something firsthand, discover it yourself, than it is to just, have someone blurt it out to you. So, although there is a more beneficial Bananza for this particular task, I'm not gonna be showing that. So even though I'm not gonna show it, I did use another Bananza form that Nintendo haven't officially revealed. In fact, that did the lion's share, let's say. But what you'll see will be Kong Bananza. And there was some stuff where I really did need the Kong Bananza, not just for footage. What's more, anyone who skips this section will think I did the whole thing in the Kong Bananza. So if you've seen this section, please write in the comments, I can't believe you did all this using just the Kong Bananza. It'll be our secret. So I started smashing, and I just smashed and smashed and smashed and smashed. And very quickly I realized that I could not be that blasé about it for a number of reasons. Chief among them, if you destroy something low down and it's high above, it is possible to destroy it still, but it's an absolute flippin' nuisance. DK may be great at climbing, but he is not fantastic at jumping, it has to be said, and there's not really that much you can do in terms of ranged destruction. I mean, you can pick up a rock and throw it, but you gotta make sure that it's a rock and not, dirt or something, because dirt will just stick to whatever you've thrown it at, and that is, well, you've just made the problem bigger for yourself. What's more, there are these sort of indestructible, well, they become globes when they're floating in the air, and if there are any rocks around on those, it's very hard to reach them, so I had to be really careful around any area like that. I destroyed absolutely everything I could. It was very important. So very quickly I learned that I needed to be reasonably systematic, I would pick an area and then I would do sort of upwards and sort of go down and try and do it all in layers, sort of like, well, like sandpaper, but more sort of ape-focused. And I'll be honest, the initial area took me way longer than I anticipated. I didn't know how long it was going to take me. I didn't know how long this whole thing was going to take me. But suffice it to say, it took, well, let's just say it took longer than I'd hoped, but not as long as I feared. But I destroyed the first sort of area, and I could kind of tell where it was going to begin with, but it was a lot sort of... I didn't realize quite how deep and how much of the landscape was made up by destructible material. I mean, it makes sense when you stop and think about it, but you sort of realize, oh lordy, I'm gonna be getting rid of a lot here. I'm not gonna lie, there was a part of me at this point that thought, maybe this is enough. Maybe I can make a video about just destroying an entire area, and subsequently, after, sort of just doing a bit of research just now before recording this, I found out that people have done pretty much just that. Although mostly on the hilltop layer, people have destroyed an entire area and gone, hey, look at this. And, it's just as well I decided to push on because I don't want to be lumped in with people who only did a bit. But I pushed on and I learned another thing very quickly, and that's if you find concrete, you need to destroy that immediately, because all the things that I mentioned about things being up in the air are only compounded when it's concrete, because concrete is a flippin' nuisance to get rid of. I mean, yeah, there's the boom block and stuff like that, or boom bomb that I could have just picked up and thrown at it. But, you know, you can't throw an infinite distance. If it was too high up, I would never be able to destroy it. So every time I came across some concrete, I made sure to delete that sucker. I also found out something quite interesting, just purely by chance, and that's that there's a lot of destructible material inside the indestructible, I suppose, shells, for lack of a better term. You can see them when they're, like, loading in. You can see the destructible part, and I sort of saw them and I went, oh god, I missed all that, and it's up in the air. You get a bit closer and the shell appears around it. I mean, it's probably simpler to do it that way, but there are also areas where it makes no sense, like in these great big things in the ground, essentially, you know, the flat plane. They didn't need to put a load of destructible material there as well. They did. Again, probably just because it was easier, but interesting? Maybe. I also found out that there's quite a bit of material that is, I mean, maybe I could have destroyed it all. Maybe. But I'm talking about stuff that is below the surface of water. And you can just about reach some of it by jumping and doing the down punch, dive punch? Is that what it's called? You can reach some of it using that, and maybe if I use boom bombs or something like that, I could have done even more. But frankly, I only had a limited amount of patience, and, you know, it doesn't change anything anyway. You can't reach this stuff, so I just destroyed as much as I could reasonably do. I carried on, and just kept destroying stuff, just kept absolutely decimating the landscape. And it is, I'm not gonna lie, it's a little bit tedious doing this. I wouldn't recommend it. But there was another interesting little quirk that appeared, and I don't know this for certain. I'd have to, like, review the footage side by side as closely as I can, and even then, I don't know if I've got the right footage to be able to do it, but I am very certain that there were instances where there were areas I'd completely leveled, like even little twiddly bits in the ground and stuff like that, and then I would leave and come back, and little twiddly bits would have appeared. And I don't know precisely why this is, or even if this is indeed the case and it's not my, you know, just terrible memory and there's things that I just missed, entirely possible. But I do wonder if this is the case and they had been reappearing upon coming back to it. I'm guessing it's something to do with, like, the voxel system that they're using, so that rather than being like the whole landscape is distinctly remembered, it's sort of just a sort of a vague idea, and then when you revisit somewhere, it sort of just goes, oh, well, there was some terrain here, but, and it just sort of creates a semi-random shape. Again, I don't know that for a fact, but it's possible. It was really interesting to break the game apart in this way, and there were more discoveries I made which I'll detail later because they make more sense when you can see the whole thing. I kept smashing, destroying, desperately trying to find enough gold to get enough Banandium energy in order to turn into the Bananza forms, which thankfully, with the unnamed Bananza form, was reasonably straightforward. And eventually, I managed it. I got the majority of it all destroyed. I only had to go around and do little bits of cleanup and, you know, referring to the voxel thing that I mentioned before, I'm fairly certain some of it just reappeared for some reason, but I did it. I sort of alluded to that earlier, didn't I? I destroyed area after area, slowly chipping away at all the different parts of the layer, and eventually I managed it. Should we have a look? It is so different that it might as well be a completely different level. There was so much that I didn't recognize. It's just so boring by comparison, and that's to be expected. But this is kind of what the base of the level looks like. This is the raw form without any of the destructible stuff. And I think it's fascinatingly almost lonely in certain areas. I discovered that important NPCs have like solid ground underneath them, and you can see this just in your game as standard without deleting all this stuff. But they're on solid ground, like unbreakable ground, so that you can't move them. Which makes sense at the end of the day, and it's the same for required items like boom blocks or boom bombs. I can never remember what the damn thing's called. Because they're required, or at least very important for the player, they're put on solid ground so that you can't muck about with their position. However, non-essential NPCs and items, they're just put on anything. Sorry, Rambi, apparently you're non-essential. In fact, when digging around Rambi specifically, I noticed that his position seemed to almost slide a bit. Like, I don't know if his position was actually changing, but it certainly looked to be the way. And in that case, maybe you can manipulate where Rambi is, at least to some small degree. Someone cleverer than me and with a lot more patience could maybe take Rambi off the edge. It's a possibility. I also noticed the game have a little quirk about how it culls certain objects, and more specifically the shadows. So when something's not on screen in a video game, generally it's what's called culled. It doesn't need to render it because, you know, the player's not looking at it, so it just doesn't render it, frees up resources. The problem is that in this instance, that also affects the shadows, and so you had this strange instance of shadows just suddenly appearing just as you sort of brought something into view. It was a really interesting little sort of quirk, and I don't think it's something you'd necessarily notice or maybe even possibly see at all within standard gameplay. Maybe the destructible ground kind of masks it to some degree, I don't know. But it was certainly interesting to be able to see all this pop, 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 pop. Was it nice? No, but you know what, it's fine. It's not a big deal. And it's the same with the pop-in with, like, the non-destructible things in the grounds that became these floating orbs. You'd almost never see it because there'd be all this destructible ground in the way. It's just, I don't know, it's just really clever to be able to sort of peel back the curtain. Just have a little look. I love that stuff. All in all, this whole ordeal took me over 2.5 hours, which, again, longer than I hoped, but nowhere near as long as I feared. I feared that I'd be there and, you know, it'd be something that I'd have to do over multiple sessions, but I was able to just sit down 2.5 hours, kind of 3 with a bit of cleanup, just remove everything. Absolutely everything. Okay, not absolutely everything. The stuff under the water, yeah. There are a few minor bits that are maybe still floating in the air. I reached a point where I thought, you know what? It's good enough. I can't reach everything anyway. You know, if the game is happy that you can destroy, I don't know, like 90% of the breakable stuff in those little sort of pyramid challenge things, and that's good enough for the game, it's good enough for me. Throughout my time, I accumulated 42,500 gold, which was, I'm not gonna lie, that's a lot. I'm pretty pleased I made a second save file so that I don't absolutely destroy the game's economy by doing this. Not that the economy is especially robust. 350 Banandium chips as well, a load of red balloons, and the thing that I was really interested in was the smash-in stats. You know, how much land did I destroy? It turns out it doesn't matter because it caps out at 100,000 meters cubed. Honestly, that was genuinely disappointing. I thought, hey, I'm going to be able to measure the whole landmass, and it turns out I can't. There was one last thing I needed to check, and that's... is this persistent? You know, is destruction persistent? I know it's not if you go to a different layer or something like that, and that's understandable, but this was a separate save file I'd made, and I thought maybe if I load the other save file, which I'm gonna have to blur the information of, again, spoilers, and then load the other one back, is all the destruction going to remain, or is it going to reload? It reloaded everything. I've got to be honest, I kind of expected this. I got all the footage that I needed, I destroyed the whole thing. You know, what was I gonna do with this if I could go back to it? Oh, look, it's empty and difficult to navigate again. It's not fun. It's not fun to go through it again. It wasn't fun to do it in the first place, to be brutally honest. I mean, I was still a little bit gutted when I loaded it up and, you know, it was just all there. And I've got to be honest, I recognized it so little, I thought, oh, I'm on the wrong layer. It's loaded me on the lower layer. So I went into teleport and it was just like, oh no, this is the right layer. I'm just not used to it looking like this. Would I recommend you do something similar yourself? Absolutely not. You get a lot of gold, you get a fair few Banandium chips. Apart from that, it's kind of worthless. It's interesting to see, absolutely, and no doubt someone with, you know, significantly more time on their hands than me will probably end up doing some other layers. You know, maybe Canyon, if they really have more time than I have. But all in all, I'm satisfied. I'm pleased I did this. I got to see something that realistically not many people would have seen, certainly yet. I mean, obviously now I've put it online, kind of ruined that sort of secret club for myself, but well, maybe it's still a secretive club. It's just bigger with more lovely people. Let's think of it that way. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, then why don't you spend 2.5 hours smashing the ever-loving out of that subscribe button, and be sure to check out NintendoLife.com for all sorts of lovely Nintendo-related content. Thank you again for watching. Bye-bye. It turns out it doesn't matter because it caps out at 100,000 meters squared. Cubed. With more lovely people. Let's think of it that way. Why not?